Muy buenos días. La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México les da la más cordial bienvenida a esta ceremonia inaugural del Segundo Congreso Internacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción. Saludamos a las autoridades que presiden este acto. La doctora María del Carmen Contilloc Escontria, directora de la Escuela Nacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción. La doctora Claudia Guadalupe García Yampayas, secretaria general de la ENALT. Y la maestra Karen Beth Luznia, jefa del Departamento de Lingüística Aplicada de la ENALT. Saludamos la presencia de autoridades universitarias, de investigadores, académicos y panelistas nacionales y extranjeros que participarán en el Congreso, así como de alumnos y trabajadores de la ENALT que hoy nos acompañan. Señoras y señores, sean todas y todos ustedes bienvenidos. Para dar inicio a este acto, tiene la palabra la doctora María del Carmen Contilloc Escontria.
Muy buenos días. Estimada doctora Claudia Guadalupe García Yampayas, secretaria general de la ENALT. Maestra Karen Beth Luznia, jefa del Departamento de Lingüística Aplicada de la ENALT. Estimada doctora Cristina Gómez, plenarista inaugural de este Congreso. Maestra Delia Peña, coordinadora de la Mediateca de la ENALT y moderadora de nuestra primera plenaria. Invitados especiales, funcionarios universitarios, exdirectoras y exdirector del entonces CILLT, señoras y señores coordinadores que hoy nos acompañan, así como a la comunidad universitaria, estudiantes de las licenciaturas y del posgrado en lingüística, colegas académicos de la escuela y amigos todos. Ha llegado este tan esperado momento en el que por fin nos reencontramos los académicos y estudiantes de las áreas de enseñanza de lenguas, los lingüistas aplicados y traductores, para compartir los avances, las nuevas tendencias e investigaciones realizadas, así como las experiencias vividas en nuestros respectivos campos del conocimiento. El esfuerzo desplegado por el comité académico, así como del comité logístico y técnico de la escuela, merecen un gran reconocimiento porque en realidad hemos organizado 2 congresos. El presencial, cuya planeación comenzó desde el 2019, con la intención de celebrarlo en agosto de 2020 y que de manera presencial hubiéramos realizado en nuestras instalaciones del campus universitario, y este congreso virtual, que se fue gestando a raíz de la permanencia de la pandemia del SARS-CoV-2, que de manera increíble aún nos aqueja. Ha sido el entusiasmo y el deseo de remontar los obstáculos que el uso de la tecnología presenta lo que nos permite estar el día de hoy dándoles a todos ustedes la más cálida de las bienvenidas a esta ENALT virtual. Mi agradecimiento también al doctor Héctor Benítez Pérez, director de la Dirección General de Cómputo y de las Tecnologías de la Información y Comunicación de GETIC, por su invaluable apoyo y felicitarlo por el trabajo tan profesional de su equipo técnico para la realización de este segundo congreso. El Congreso, como ustedes saben, representa el evento por excelencia de la escuela. En él se plasman las funciones sustantivas de la escuela: docencia, investigación y difusión de la cultura. Por supuesto, no olvidamos los 17 encuentros nacionales de profesores de lenguas extranjeras anteriores y que desde 1982 se llevaban a cabo. A raíz del cambio de estatus, hemos hecho hincapié en continuar el trabajo académico de calidad, dando impulso a los 2 planes de estudio vigentes y, por supuesto, incentivando el trabajo realizado a través de los departamentos de lengua y sus académicos, conservando siempre el prestigio acumulado a lo largo de los más de 50 años de experiencia en la impartición de lenguas y formación docente. No en vano, la escuela es referente nacional en nuestros 3 campos de estudio. El objetivo del Congreso une y reúne los mejores trabajos propuestos por reconocidos académicos e investigadores de universidades nacionales e internacionales. En este punto, vale la pena mencionar que fue una gran sorpresa al revisar la versión final del programa, ver que entre los ponentes se encuentran ya alumnos de nuestras licenciaturas. Esto nos llena de orgullo a todos, pues es una manera de darles la bienvenida a nuestra comunidad de práctica. Su presencia marca también el inicio de un camino que seguramente continuarán construyendo paso a paso. Abordaremos temáticas diversas relacionadas con la investigación en lingüística teórica y aplicada, la didáctica de las lenguas originarias, el aprendizaje en ambientes digitales, la investigación en segundas lenguas, la traducción, por supuesto, y la diversidad cultural y lingüística, así como la política y la planificación del lenguaje. Hoy, más que nunca, y dadas las circunstancias en las que nos encontramos, los invito a disfrutar estos 3 días de trabajo académico, a realizar este ejercicio metacognitivo de reflexión y autoevaluación, de reencuentro con las técnicas y metodologías, de pensar y repensar nuestra didáctica y de encontrar posibilidades y opciones viables para la investigación innovadora. Aprovechemos estas horas de intercambio para enriquecernos y compartir generosamente nuestros saberes, pero también para exponer nuestras preocupaciones, problemas, en la manera en que hemos enfrentado los muchos retos y cómo los hemos remontado, siempre con ese ánimo de aprender y de ofrecer lo mejor a todas y a todos los que participan en este congreso. Nos veremos en la ceremonia de clausura para recapitular la experiencia académica vivida, mirando siempre hacia un futuro mejor, recargado de energía y motivación para continuar haciendo nuestro trabajo con ese ímpetu que nos caracteriza y con la calidad que se espera de esta gran comunidad académica. Los invito, pues, a que hagamos de este congreso todo un éxito. Por mi raza habrá el espíritu. Muchas gracias.
Hace uso de la palabra la maestra Karen Beth Luznia.
Muy buenos días a todos. Estimada directora de la Escuela Nacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción, doctora María del Carmen Contijoch Escontria. Estimada Secretaría General, doctora Claudia Guadalupe García Yampayas. Estimados colegas, académicos y alumnos. Hoy es un día muy especial, ya que iniciaremos este segundo Congreso Internacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción, dentro de un contexto difícil que nos ha presentado un sinfín de retos y obstáculos para llevarlo a cabo en formato virtual. Dentro de situaciones que nos limitan y que nos hacen replantear lo que siempre se había hecho, nacen nuevas formas de reunir a las personas para compartir reflexiones, resultados, aciertos, errores y nuevas propuestas. Seremos espectadores y partícipes durante estos 3 días de discusiones sobre temas de cultura, de didáctica, de lingüística teórica, de experimentos sobre la lengua, de formación de profesores, de enseñanza de lenguas indígenas y de traducción, entre muchos otros. Compartiremos nuestras experiencias e investigaciones dentro de las áreas que nos interesan de manera sincrónica y asincrónica y en los talleres en línea. Hemos tenido que hacer grandes ajustes a nuestra vida todos, apreciar lo que tenemos y aprender a resolver. Aprender a hacer lo que no sabíamos con lo que hay. El poder llevar a cabo este congreso es un ejemplo de la frase atribuida a Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done. Poseemos una gran fortuna de contar con la participación de plenaristas internacionales y nacionales que gracias a su generosidad también se suman a nuestro esfuerzo de no parar. Nos acompañarán durante el Congreso la doctora Cristina Gunn, de la Universidad de Essex, Gran Bretaña, el doctor Robert O'Dowd, de la Universidad de León, España, el doctor Ovidi Carbonell Cortés, de la Universidad de Salamanca, España, la doctora María del Carmen Curcó Cobos, del posgrado en Lingüística de la UNAM, y el doctor Enrique Fernando Nava López, del Instituto de Investigaciones Antropológicas de la UNAM. Les invitamos a seguir las pláticas desde el programa interactivo que recibieron y desde el micrositio de ponencias pregrabadas. También el público en general podrá seguir las plenarias y mesas redondas desde el canal Eventos CILLT en YouTube. Quiero agradecer a todos los ponentes y asistentes de toda la República y de otros países. Gracias por su paciencia y por su fe. Se pudo lograr este evento. El comité organizador ha hecho un gran trabajo en la organización y replanteamiento del evento. El equipo técnico de 30 integrantes y más ha sido fundamental. Ha puesto su mejor esfuerzo y actitud en aceptar este gran reto y gracias a ellos y su trabajo minucioso estamos aquí. Esta reunión nos invita a reflexionar, a unir esfuerzos y a perseverar en nuestra misión en la educación. Les deseo la mejor de las experiencias académicas en esta, su casa, la UNAM, la INAT, y sigamos adelante.
Escuchemos a continuación el mensaje en video que para esta ocasión nos dicta el doctor Enrique Graue Vigers, rector de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México.
Doctora María del Carmen Contilloc, directora de la Escuela Nacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción de nuestra Casa de Estudios. Maestra Karen Beth Luznia, jefa del Departamento de Lingüística Aplicada, y todos ustedes sean muy bienvenidos a esta segunda ocasión, en esta ocasión virtual, del Congreso de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción, un evento que ha sido diseñado para fortalecer la enseñanza de las lenguas modernas, satisfacer la gran diversidad de intereses en torno a estos estudios y así, aprendiendo lenguajes, podernos conectar mejor con el mundo. En los siguientes días, en una combinación de ponencias, talleres y mesas redondas, y en estos ágiles formatos que se han implementado, se abordarán por especialistas nacionales e internacionales problemáticas que abonarán el intercambio plural de saberes y nuevas formas de enseñanza. Y vaya que este es un momento oportuno para analizar cómo debemos enseñar en el presente y en el futuro. Estos meses de distanciamiento y educación remota nos han dejado muchos sinsabores y dolorosas experiencias, pero también han abierto nuevas oportunidades que debemos saber aprovechar. La forma de enseñar se transformó súbitamente gracias a la capacidad de ustedes, las y los especialistas y docentes, para encontrar, diseñar o implementar las estrategias más adecuadas e innovadoras para la comunidad estudiantil y procurar así su mejor aprovechamiento. Será pues la organización de este evento o el momento en el que se da. Necesitamos compartir experiencias, optimizar logros y aprender de los errores cometidos. Y este es pues un gran momento y una magnífica oportunidad para hacer balances, revisar estrategias y metodologías y avanzar con decisión hacia las nuevas formas de educar y aprender. Yo quiero agradecerles a los y las distintos ponentes y a todos los asistentes virtuales el interés académico, la curiosidad por explorar nuevos rumbos y su compromiso con la educación demostrada con su asistencia a este encuentro. Doctora Contilloc, directora del INALT, a usted y a su equipo de trabajo les agradezco el esfuerzo por hacer posible esta segunda edición. Yo estoy seguro de que traerá beneficios para todas y todos y que enriquecerá la reflexión virtuosa en torno al proceso de enseñanza-aprendizaje. Sin más, hoy, 11 de marzo del 2021, declaro inaugurado el segundo Congreso Virtual Internacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción. Muchas felicidades y muchas gracias por la oportunidad de dirigirme a ustedes. Por mi raza hablará el espíritu.
Es así como concluye este acto inaugural y los invitamos a presenciar la sesión plenaria en la que modera la maestra María de la Paz Adelia Peña Clavel, coordinadora de la Mediateca. A todas y todos ustedes, muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Buenos días. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la primera plenaria del programa académico de este segundo Congreso Internacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción de la Escuela Nacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Soy Adelia Peña, moderadora de esta plenaria, y es un placer saludarles. Agradecemos a la comunidad que nos está siguiendo por YouTube y la página de Facebook. Los invitamos a que se suscriban a nuestro canal para recibir las notificaciones de las transmisiones de este evento. Antes de iniciar, comparto con ustedes información importante para quienes nos acompañan tanto en las redes y en esta sala de Zoom. La plenaria tiene una duración de 45 minutos y se cuentan con 15 minutos para preguntas. Atentamente, les solicitamos compartan sus opiniones y escriban sus preguntas para la plenarista en inglés o en español en el espacio del chat. Iniciamos. Es para mí un honor presentar a la doctora Cristina Gono, profesora de la Universidad de Essex en Gran Bretaña, quien dictará la plenaria titulada Rethinking Support for Language Teacher Wellbeing. La doctora Gono es profesora y responsable del programa CILLT en su universidad y actualmente es subdirectora del Departamento de Educación y la responsable de los módulos de formación y actualización de docentes que abordan temas que vinculan la psicología y el aprendizaje de una lengua extranjera y la práctica docente. Colabora como editora con otros destacados académicos en las colecciones New Directions in Language Learning Psychology y en New Insights into Language Anxiety, Theory, Research and Educational Implications. Es coautora con la doctora Rebecca Oxford del instrumento MYE, Managing Your Emotions Questionnaire. Ha publicado múltiples artículos en revistas arbitradas y en 2020 se publicó el libro The Emotional Roller Coaster of Language Teaching, en el cual participó como editora y autora con otros investigadores. Actualmente está trabajando una nueva obra con Kate Burton que lleva el título de Flourishing School, Cultivating Wellbeing for Teachers and Leaders, y cuya publicación está prevista para la primavera de 2022. Doctora Gonu, thank you very much for being here. You are most welcome, and without further ado, I shall give you the floor. Could you please share your screen? Muchas gracias. Iniciamos.
Okay. I hope I have done everything okay. You can hear me, you can see me, and you can see my screen and my slides. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. Adelia and I have been talking about this conference for quite some time now, and I think we would all have liked to be together in the same place and have the chance to see each other and have nice discussions about languages, linguistics, and language education more generally. Unfortunately, this was not possible, and it was also beyond our control. But it's really nice to be in this online environment with you now on Zoom. And I would like to share with you some of my own thinking and some of the ideas that are fitting into the work I do on language teacher well-being. The talk is titled Rethinking Support for Language Teacher Wellbeing, and I have chosen this title because I am hoping to combine some of the theoretical insights into the topic, a little bit of the research that is already out there on this area, but mainly on areas associated with language teacher well-being, and finally some strategies and activities that teachers themselves, but also leaders and managers, educational managers who work with groups of teachers and who manage groups of teachers can actually use as part of their practice. So I will start with defining well-being and also try to convince you that it is important to focus on well-being. So I have a question here, why focus on well-being? And I will show some of the arguments that are there in the literature and again, some of my own thinking. I will then move on to talk about well-being among teachers and language teachers, like teachers in general and language teachers in particular. Some of the research that has already been published and what is happening with relation to well-being and language teacher education, either pre-service before teachers begin to officially work as teachers, but also in service, what is going on there with relation to well-being, and what we can do in order to cultivate well-being, teacher well-being, but also the well-being among our group of teachers. Before we start, I have a question here for you, and I would like you to in a way, to be thinking about this question while I am introducing the different areas and different ideas connected with well-being. The question is, what is the one thing that you might want to do differently with respect to your well-being? So this refers to your own well-being as teachers in the different institutions that you are in. So one thing, think about one thing now, and we will go back to this question at the end of the plenary. I will start with defining well-being, and the nice, interesting thing here is that, in fact, there is no precise definition. And by this, I mean that if we, of course, Google this word, or if we look it up in a dictionary, let's say Cambridge Dictionary online, we will find the definition. Okay, and the most common definition that we will find across all these different sources is that well-being refers to the state of us feeling good and functioning well. But we need to think of how we can define well-being within the research that is done within language education, but also as part of the language teacher's practice and the language teacher educator's practice. So it is important to have in mind that well-being refers to this particular state of feeling good and functioning well. It is associated with stress, but it is not necessarily the opposite of stress. And it does not simply refer to how individuals can be relaxed, comfortably, and happy all the time. In fact, well-being and many associated notions which are related to teacher emotional states, to teacher emotions and teacher psychology are viewed from a more positive, let's say, positive balanced, positive oriented approach. But what is important to understand here is that we do not refer to instances where individuals and also teachers feel happy all the time, feel relaxed all the time. In fact, there is a lot that an individual and a teacher can do in order to secure high levels of well-being, high levels of healthy and positive well-being. And we will talk about the challenges, the obstacles to some extent, and also what can be done in order to reach a satisfactory state of well-being. But there is there is a long way in order to achieve that, and that is why it is important to take action from early on. I have included here on this diagram the 4 core aspects of well-being. There are different ways of thinking about the components or the aspects or the dimensions of well-being, and in some sources, some of these aspects might be grouped together. For example, the spiritual and the intellectual might be part of the same thing or the same aspect of well-being. So we might not always have 4 core aspects, but I want to keep these 4 core aspects of well-being because I think that this distinction gives us a clear idea of what each of the aspects is about. The important thing to highlight is that it is important for all of these 4 aspects of well-being to be functioning well and preferably at the same time. If one of these aspects is not in place, the entire well-being system is likely to not function well, and it might also collapse. Now, let's look at each of these in turn, and I will start with physical well-being and follow a clockwise direction here. Physical well-being, in brief, refers to physical health. It actually refers to action we take, things that we do to remain active, to make sure our body remains active. So this can include things as simple as going out for a walk, or more organized, more complicated, such as doing a particular sport, participating, in tournaments and competitions and so on. It really depends on what each one of us is interested in and likes to do. The second aspect of well-being is emotional well-being, which basically refers to our mental health. By emotional well-being, we clearly refer to instances of stress and anxiety, and also to a number of other emotions, both positive and negative, that individuals, but also teachers, experience in their everyday life. The third aspect is intellectual well-being, and here we refer to our attempts, our efforts to be part of a community, be open to new ideas, try to be creative, try to take part in activities with others, some individual activities as well, but most importantly, activities with others. And I would say that this is something that teachers do a lot on a day-to-day basis, because the people that they are always working closely with, I think the first group of people is their students. There's a lot of interaction and collaboration between the teacher and the students. But teachers do take part in activities and try to be creative on their own, but also with others when they are working with colleagues. And if we think of specific groups of learners, for example, young learners, children, there is a lot of collaboration that might be happening between the teachers and the parents or the children's carers. So we can think of different levels in which teachers practice group participation, collaboration, and so on. And all of this enables them to be open to new ideas, to exchange ideas with others, and to be creative and flexible. And the last aspect of well-being is spiritual well-being. And here we refer to the purpose of finding meaning in life, trying to assign meaning in what we do, by also taking part in a number of creative endeavors. For example, being engaged with the literature, with art, with different forms of art, actually, in order to make sure that our spiritual development is also happening at the same time. Now, why is it important to focus on well-being? Why should we be thinking about that along with all of the practical things that teachers do in class? For example, classroom management, lesson planning, assessment, correcting students' mistakes, and so on and so forth. It is important to focus on well-being, because on teacher well-being in particular, because teachers are actually assessed a lot. And what is assessed is their performance. There is a lot of performance-based assessment of teachers, which can result in high stress levels. And these high stress levels can lead to different consequences. Some of them, you see them on the screen, such as loss of sleep, sleep deprivation in different ways, anxiety, high levels of anxiety, and on many occasions, unmanageable levels of anxiety, and then different mood swings, mood changes, irritability. Another reason why it is important to focus on well-being is early career teachers. What can we do to make sure that early career teachers do not leave the profession early on? There is research in contexts such as the US and the UK that has actually shown that 1/3 of teachers, of newly qualified teachers, leave the profession within the first 5 years of training. So they complete their training and then they are ready to enter the profession, to start a job, to start a new teaching job. But when threats to well-being, when high levels of stress come in, teachers tend to quit the job. First, they in a way, they show signs of absenteeism. So they try to avoid activities. They try to avoid activities that are related to their work. They might be absent for a longer period of time, and this might lead to really high levels of teacher attrition. If we do not focus on well-being, there might be threats on teacher retention and teacher professional longevity, how long they stay in the profession and what they do as part of their role. Another reason why we should focus on well-being is because if we think of high stress levels and high anxiety levels, these are usually due to a threat, a perceived threat, a threat that one teacher might perceive as much more threatening than something else. And it is important to highlight that well-being can be quite subjective, and threats to well-being can be quite subjective to some extent, because, for example, something that might stress me out might not necessarily stress out one of my colleagues, and the other way around. So there is a lot of subjectivity going on there. But anxiety and stress cause an overfocus on threatening stimuli. For example, failure to deliver a lesson, failure to deal with a student, a particular student adequately, fear of making mistakes, failure of not coming across as a good teacher. Anxiety, especially if it is high and at a level that teachers cannot manage it, can reduce motivation and teachers' ability to concentrate. And both can result in poor performance. But what is worth mentioning here is that they can result in poor performance, not just in teachers, but also in students. And we should be thinking of the two groups, like the teachers as one group and the students as another group, as being working together constantly and continuously and on many occasions for a long period of time. And we should keep in mind that the psychology of one group can very easily influence the psychology of the other group. Any positive emotions, in a way, that we experience as teachers are transferred to the students. And the same happens with negative emotions. And the same goes for the different direction from the students to the teacher. Any positivity or motivation that students experience usually can be seen by the teacher, and any negative, difficult emotions that students experience can also be seen by the teachers. And this is because they spend a lot of time together at school and in any kind of educational institution. So teacher well-being is very likely to influence student well-being and vice versa. Now, what happens with teachers? Why are teachers such an interesting group of professionals to look at and consider their well-being and make sure that their well-being is addressed in teacher education, but also in everyday practice? I will start by showing some information about teachers, general education teachers, and then share with you what we already know about language teachers. I think the first thing that we can all agree with is that teachers lead busy lives. And for many teachers, their life in the post-COVID era, like what the time that since last March, really, a year now, those teachers will actually tell researchers that their lives are much busier now because of the requirements of online teaching and because of all other demands and commitments that have increased exponentially since last March, since the outbreak of the pandemic. So I am sure you will agree with me that teachers do lead busy lives and they have to manage and tackle both personal and professional commitments. At the same time, they are the central hub in the classroom. So they are very important in classroom life, in what is happening in class. This doesn't mean that the students are not important. But it does mean that the teachers, even if we are talking about learner-centered curricula, learner-centered classrooms, communicative language teaching, and so on, which are so prominent nowadays, even if we are talking about such contexts where learners are the focus of attention, it is still a teacher who is in charge of class, of taking decisions, and also deciding how things will happen in class in a way. From this perspective, they are the central hub in the classroom. And as I have already said, they influence students' learning and student psychologies through a process that is known in general psychology as contagion, and more specifically, emotional contagion. This means that psychologies and emotions, more specifically, are very easily transferred from the teacher to the students and the other way around. In the workplace, threats to teacher well-being are what you basically see on the screen. The first threat is excessive workload and excessive demands that come from different sources, that come from different groups of people, from the students, sometimes from colleagues, many times from management, from senior management. And again, depending on the different contexts that teachers are in, there can be other sources such as parents, Ministry of Education, and so on, that add pressure to the teachers. Interpersonal relationships can sometimes be quite demanding or a little bit challenging to deal with, and this could be with colleagues, students, parents, and so on. There might be lack of support in specific institutions, and by this we refer mainly to support from leadership and management in the institution, which might make teachers feel less autonomous about what they do, less autonomous in terms of how they teach and what they teach, and teachers also feel that they do not have control of what they are doing. What they do is prescribed by others, and they need to strictly follow this plan. Low levels of well-being can also be due to issues with one's professional role. There might be cases where teachers are not always clear about their responsibilities as part of their role. They find it difficult to adjust to change, and change again can be due to different reasons. They might not be always sure where their career is taking them, what their career prospects are, and whether they feel any form of personal fulfillment in terms of what they're doing as part of their role, their professional role. And all of this can actually pose a threat to teachers' identity, teachers' professional identity. And another threat to teacher well-being could be students, could be the actual students in class. So here we can talk about disengaged students, undisciplined students, students who do not come to class, they procrastinate, they do not submit homework, etc. Who is affected by all of these threats to well-being? There is a misconception, I would say, that it is only newly qualified teachers that might experience very high stress levels, but that's not true. All teachers are likely to be affected, and this is due to different reasons. All of them are likely to be affected, but some of them might be better able to handle their stress, their anxiety, and any potential threats to their well-being. Some teachers are more immune to stressors, whereas others are more vulnerable. Now, how could different groups of teachers be affected by stress, by low levels of well-being? You see here three groups of teachers, and the different groups are highlighted in orange. We start with newly qualified teachers, and here the main issue is high rates of attrition. Teachers leaving the profession usually within the first 5 years of training. The second group is mid-career teachers who have been in the profession long enough to have experienced continuous, prolonged cases of stress. So for them, stress is more longer term, is more chronic, and for this reason, it can lead to burnout, to a form of feeling like depersonalization, low personal accomplishment in terms of what they do as teachers. And the third group of teachers, which I personally find very interesting, is highly experienced teachers who are taking on more managerial roles in their institution. And here I refer to educational leaders and managers, because this group is interesting because not only do they need to attend to their own well-being as teachers and as professionals, but they also need to attend to others' well-being. And by others here, I refer to the teachers, the groups of teachers that they are managing. Now, what happens with relation to language teachers? What are the challenges that they experience? I think that one important distinction and something that has led to a debate back in the 80s and 90s was this native versus non-native language teachers, specifically with relation to English, native versus non-native English-speaking teachers. When have they learned English? Is English their first language or not? What environment are they teaching in? And what challenges they are experiencing because of their first and second language. There were back then some inherent ideological assumptions about the superiority of one group over the other, that native teachers, for example, are better than non-native teachers because they have acquired the language naturally. Non-native teachers are better than language teachers because they have gone through the process of language learning and they can empathize with the problems or the difficulties that their students might experience. So this might make them better teachers. And this debate included the questions that you see at the second point on the screen, their accent. So how self-conscious a teacher might be about their accent. I think that as in our experience as language teachers, we have often heard our students saying that I am nervous about speaking because of my accent, because I worry how my accent will be perceived by other people. And the same goes for teachers. One source of worry, especially for non-native teachers, is their accent. Another question that was considered back then was learning versus acquisition. Learning usually happens in classrooms. So here we are talking about instructed classroom settings. So non-native teachers have learned the language in a classroom, whereas acquisition happens more naturally, and it takes place in places such as our home, with our family, with parents and carers, in which case we were listening to the language and we were acquiring the language more naturally. And this is what happens with one's first language or languages, first languages if we are talking about bilingual people. And another question, something that I have mentioned a few minutes ago, is empathy. Which group of teachers, is it the native or the non-native teachers, can empathize a lot more or much better with their students, and in what way high degrees of empathy can facilitate students' learning? With relation to language teachers, we also know some things about their anxiety, about their emotions more generally, not just anxiety, but also other emotions such as frustration, happiness a little bit, so if we want to talk about something positive, pride, but also frustration and disappointment, and concern over professional identities, teachers' professional identities. The self-consciousness with relation to being a native teacher, being a non-native teacher, the emotions that teachers experience, and especially the negative emotions that they experience, might pose a number of limiting self-beliefs to teachers. And these limiting self-beliefs lead to thoughts such as, I'm not a good teacher, or I'm not good enough, or this particular person comes across or is a better teacher than me. And all of this can have an impact on teachers' actual teaching classroom practice and the expectations of their professional role, what exactly they are expected to do as part of their role and in their institution. Other challenges that language teachers experience are large classes. In many parts of the world, large classes are the norm rather than the exception. There are cases where teachers are teaching languages. I do not refer to English language teaching here only, but any foreign language really, where teachers teach in a lecture theatre and they teach large groups of students. For example, a minimum of, let's say, 60, 80, 100 students. So teachers are teaching languages, speaking, for example, or listening to such large classes. And this can be very challenging by itself. So we are talking about large classes in terms of the size of the class, but there are many times when these large classes also take place under difficult circumstances, where there is not sufficient equipment. There might be not enough resources for all students in this large class, and this can be quite stressful for the teachers. Online classes is a sort of a new challenge. Before COVID, there was some online teaching that was happening for sure, courses online, supplementary courses online, in fact, but since the outbreak, online classes are again the norm. There is very little face-to-face teaching that is happening at the moment across the world. These challenging environments, especially large classes, might mean that communication is hindered. It can be an issue because I guess one of the main reasons why students are learning a language is because they hope that they will be able to communicate through that language. They can communicate, they interact with others, they use the language in different contexts in order to get their message across. And this can have implications for classroom management and for teacher roles. What happens when, for example, the teacher is expected to teach speaking, let's say to do a speaking task with a group of 150 students in the same class. So what exactly will the teacher role be in this case? How exactly is the teacher going to manage such a large class? This can be a problem in small online classes too, with having disengaged students who do not turn on their cameras in class. This is quite an issue here at Essex, and something that we discuss a lot when we meet to talk about how online teaching is going. So there might be issues there as well, but of course when we are teaching foreign languages and we are hoping that communication and interaction is happening, but there are obstacles to this, then this can be quite stressful for the teacher, who always need to think of alternative solutions. Within language education, well-being is a fairly new concept, that a fairly new idea that has been discussed explicitly in some recent publications. It has, however, been addressed through work and research that has taken place with relation to other constructs. One of them is emotions. Focus on specific emotions, such as anxiety. There has been a somewhat disproportionate focus on anxiety as opposed to other emotions, but also when researchers investigate and then talk about teacher emotions more generally. Another construct that is associated with well-being is emotional intelligence, which has been researched to some extent within language education. And we also know a little bit within language education about burnout. But what happens in teacher education? So how can we cultivate well-being? Well, it might be difficult to cultivate well-being if it is not discussed in teacher education, because in order to cultivate well-being, to find ways to address it, we need to make sure that in the first place, it is part of teacher education. And unfortunately, it is not as yet. This is because there seems to be a stronger focus on the technical side of things, on technical skills and on teaching methods. These are very important. I think that no one can contest that. It is very important to tell teachers, to teach them explicitly how to teach skills, how to teach grammar, how to manage the classroom, how to correct students' mistakes in speaking and writing, for example, what to do with materials. All of these are really important skills and methods, and teachers really need to have the tools in order to deliver all of these as part of their teaching. And I would say that for newly qualified teachers who have no teaching experience, this is really important knowledge. However, this knowledge seems to have occupied the curricula, the different teacher education curricula, and the social-emotional dimensions of teaching are somewhat neglected. If we look, this is an exercise that I actually do with my postgraduate students here at Essex who are doing the MA TESOL, and they are training to become teachers. Most of them have no teaching experience, and the first experience as English language teachers that they have is here as part of the MA course. And what I do is I give them the syllabus of widely known, widely recognized teacher education courses that lead to certificates. And I give them the syllabus with a week-by-week breakdown of topics that are covered, and I ask them to evaluate it, to comment on it, to reflect on what is good with the syllabus, what they particularly like, and whether they think that there is anything missing. And actually, they come up with lots of different ideas. I'm not going to go through them now. But when preparing for this exercise, what I have noticed myself is that in these courses, there is rarely any input on social-emotional dimensions of teaching, on the psychology of language learners or the psychology of language teachers. There is usually a session or two on motivation, which is very hopeful, and it is useful knowledge for practicing teachers. But other than motivation, which is a psychological variable, there's nothing that is discussed in those courses. It is discussed indirectly. For example, when teacher educators advise, when teacher trainers advise their trainees and perhaps suggest strategies for managing anxiety and so on, it is discussed indirectly as part of this component of the course, but not in terms of input sessions, in terms of sharing some of the research ideas and so on. So something else that I wanted to share with you is the quote that you see on this screen. And this is a quote that actually comes from my own research. I haven't produced it. One of the teacher participants in my own research has actually said this to me. And I think that although initially I wasn't sure how to deal with this comment, I actually find it very useful because it has helped me to reflect on one important reason why well-being, teacher psychology, teacher emotions, and also learner emotions are not discussed enough in teacher education. So just to give you a little bit of background to the project, we were interviewing teachers a few years ago on emotions, on the topic of emotions, common emotions that they experience as part of their practice, and also what strategies they use, again, as part of their practice, in order to manage those emotions. There were specific questions about positive emotions and negative emotions. For example, you see in this quote here, I mentioned to question 9, and the interviews came after an initial questionnaire-based stage. So the questionnaire included a number of questions, and question 9 was part of that questionnaire. We gave the questionnaire to those teachers to ask them to select emotions that they experience. We gave them a list of emotions, and we asked them to select which of these emotions they experience most of the times while they're teaching, and then follow-up questions, short answer questions about what they do to manage those emotions. So I asked the teacher at the interview as well what she did to manage her emotions. And she came up with this very interesting response, saying that she finds the question 9 in this case, completely against what I am about. I do not go into a class focusing on myself. It's not about me, it's about the students. So I am focused entirely on the students. I don't mind about myself. I'm not there for me. I'm not there to feel good or not feel bad. So this question is nonsense. I think this is a quote that links very nicely with some views that I have read some time ago, that by focusing on teachers, we may be adopting a selfish approach to teaching. But I don't think that this is the case. I don't think that it is a selfish approach to teaching just by saying that we want to look after ourselves and we want to focus on our well-being, because it is important for us to look after ourselves because before we are able to look after others. And teaching is in fact a caring profession. Teachers always care about other people, and these people are our students. So before we are able to look after them and help them and make suggestions and so on, we need to make sure that we are in the right state to help our students. And this can be achieved by looking after our well-being. I will show to you 3 different sets of strategies, and for each strategy set, I have included a possible idea for an activity that you could use on your own in your capacity as teachers, or if there are any people who are managing groups of teachers in the audience, you can use them with your groups of teachers. The first strategy focuses a lot on the teachers as individual. It requires a lot of individual work from the teacher. Because we focus on teacher self-awareness, we can think of a person that is close to us, imaginary person, okay? This person is the self-critic. And it is someone who is with us all the time. And this person somehow urges us to think about our practice, to be more self-aware of what we do, to be more reflective, and to find ways to be personally and professionally effective and efficient. For example, by managing our time better, more efficiently, because time, the lack of time, is actually a very important source of stress for teachers, because they need to manage lots of different commitments at the same time. So this self-critic can help us to increase our self-awareness through reflection, through finding effective ways to do things, and also through some research that we might be doing at our own discretion. And it doesn't have to be a fully organized research project in the form that, for example, a university department might undertake, but it might be a very promising research project that an individual teacher might want to undertake through journaling, for example. Let's say I keep my own teacher diary, how each class goes, or if writing about each class is too demanding in terms of time, we can log our thoughts into the diary at the end of each teaching week, perhaps. And through action research projects, let's say I identify a challenge or a problem in my teaching, and I try to find ways to investigate this problem in a more concrete manner. So I observe myself, I get feedback from the students, and then I try to improve my action through my research. So what can we do? How can we address this? We can possibly think of a time when we felt capable of and in control of our stress. This could be at work or in life overall. And what has changed now? We are talking here about cases where there are threats to well-being, really. And in order to improve, to overcome these threats and obstacles to our well-being now, we can think of a time in the past. So a time when we felt capable of and in control of our stress, and draft a plan outlining what you would like to improve. So what has changed? What is different now? What we would like to improve or do differently. For each area of improvement, describe your current state, your target, and some practical steps that can help you reach that target. So you understand from this possible exercise that the teacher is expected to be quite self-reflective, to go back to previous practice, think about improvement, think about ideas, goal setting as well, and practical steps to actually achieve that goal. I mentioned work and life, like challenging moments at work or in life, or moments at work or in life generally where we felt capable of managing things. And I just want to show you these 4 diagrams from Chris Ayer's book on the elephant in the staff room. This is how the book is called, and refers to how emotions and well-being, threats to emotions and well-being are always there. They are in the room, but we can't always see them, or we don't want to see them. That is why hence the title of the book. So what Ayer actually showed in that book is he wrote a chapter on, he has a chapter in the book on work-life balance, and he produced these 4 diagrams asking the readers of the book to actually think about their work-life balance themselves and try to choose which of these diagrams best describes their work-life balance. You can think about it and think of which of these diagrams applies to you, to yourselves. A is when work and life are 2 totally separate things. You see that the 2 circles are separate. They are not attached to each other in whatever way. Diagram B actually shows that work and life are much closer to each other, but work is the circle that is about work is much larger than the one for life, which means that work occupies a significant part of this particular individual's life. C is where work and life are totally merged. They are together in one circle, and we don't have proportions here. We can assume that they are equally distributed in this case. And the last diagram, diagram D, actually shows that the two circles are part of one large circle. The large circle is called life, and within this large circle there is a smaller one called work, which is part of this of the large circle. Okay, so I will use this as food for thought somehow, and encourage you to think of which of these diagrams best describes you. The second set of strategies is much more collaborative in nature than the first one. The first one was kind of more individualistic. It required a lot of work with teacher selves. But the second set requires teachers to work with others. It is important to encourage teachers to ask for help, and to encourage peer dialogue, and to encourage caring and healthy relationships with colleagues. And this can be achieved through different methods. For example, sharing classes together, co-teaching. One colleague teaches half of the course, the other colleague teaches the other half. Conducting peer reviews of teaching, teachers observing other teachers when they are teaching the class, and sharing good practice. And this can happen informally. For example, 2 teachers having a chat about their teaching, or it can be done as part of a more, let's say, well-organized, well-structured training day or education away day. This set of strategies is something that I am sure many of you are already doing, but if we try to increase their use in our institutions, I think this can lead to higher levels of well-being for everybody. And remember that if teachers benefit from high levels of well-being, students will benefit as well. So we are not doing all of this just for us. We are not doing all of this just for us to feel nice, but there are other people that will benefit from this process, from the outcomes of this process, really. Now, a possible exercise here is to reflect on people that you could turn to for help if needed. So these people can be not just from your work environment, but they could be from your own personal network. I mean, family, friends, and so on. In addition, reflect specifically on how each person on the list could help you. So this reflection exercise refers to other people, and the outcome is that once we identify those people and find ways, understand the ways in which each of these people can actually help us, we can turn to them for help. The third set of strategies is again collaborative in nature, but this time with students. Collaborating with students. It is important to build and maintain a strong and supportive relationship with our students. And this can be achieved quite well if we have been working with the same group of students for a longer period of time. I think this influences in a positive way the quality of the relationship. But it doesn't mean that we can't form strong bonds and positive relationships with students whom we have known and we have worked with for a shorter period of time. It can happen in this context as well, because it can improve our classroom management, the way we deal with our students in class. And within this set of strategies, we can think of different types of communication. It is important to encourage teachers to be effective communicators. And effective communication is not achieved just through language. But it can be achieved through non-verbal means as well. So when we are talking about verbal means, it's what we say and how we say it, which can make us effective communicators. It's the humor that we use, and actually using humor in class, but also welcoming humor from the students can help to improve the relationship and the classroom management. And here we can also talk about non-verbal means of communication. For example, eye contact, maintaining eye contact with our students, using appropriate gestures, facial expressions, developing a code of communication with our students that our students can very easily understand after a certain period of time has passed. So what can we do here? We can think, again, we reflect a lot, but we can ask our colleagues as well. We may even want to ask our students too, depending on the groups we are teaching and how close we feel we are with them. So here we are thinking of techniques that are used in class to help us relate with our students and communicate effectively with them. We need to indicate in this exercise how often we make use of these techniques. And if there are any techniques that we do not use, but we would have liked to use, or we think our colleagues have recommended them to us and we think are useful, we can reflect on why this is so, why we are not using them, and how we can increase their use in class. These exercises you see that I have called them all possible exercises, okay? Because I keep working on them and keep trying to find ways to make them better and more effective for teachers and for educational managers. And actually these exercises and many of the ideas that are included in this talk are part of a book we are finalizing on, it's called The Flourishing School, How to Cultivate Wellbeing for Teachers and Leaders and Educational Managers. So these all make part of this particular project. So what can we conclude from all of this? The first point is that teacher well-being should be seen as key priority in contemporary classrooms. I personally feel that there is hope, that it is not so much neglected, and there are attempts, there are moves towards this direction. And if we try to increase the discussions, and if we also try to increase our research efforts towards this direction, then it will be made an even more important aspect to look at. Improving well-being requires whole school cultural change. It is not enough if, let's say, only one teacher in the institution, in the school, cares about it and attends to it. It is important to make sure that there is a whole school approach to well-being, that as many members of the school community are actually attuned to this as possible so that they can take concentrated effort to improve well-being. Students matter, but teachers matter too. And student well-being begins with teacher well-being. As I have already said, we do not do all of these things just for us to feel okay, to feel nice about what we do. But we are also doing that for our students. Now, remember the question I asked you at the beginning of the plenary, the well-being challenge. What change will you, what would you like to, one aspect of your well-being, let's say, that you would like to do differently, right? So what change will you make the next time that you are in the classroom or before or after class as a result of having attended this plenary? We can discuss this in more detail, or maybe this is a kind of your own reflection, your own thought, which you can keep for yourselves. But I hope that the talk has enabled you to view well-being from a different perspective and to start thinking about your own and your students' well-being in more detail. I would like to thank you very much for attending this plenary. I see that there are things in the chat, but I can't I haven't looked at them. I'm very curious to read what you have put in there, but thank you very much. And I think we have time for questions, Adelia, right?
Yes, we do have time for questions, and don't worry, I have all your questions and comments here written.
Good.
So
Thank you.
I will share with you some of them. So first of all, I think teachers are, all the people who are attending here, they have told us that they are very, very happy that you have focused on teachers, because teachers are, as you mentioned, something that we rarely think about, especially when we are managers, and sometimes we focus on students. So very, very well. Thank you very much. So, muchas gracias, doctora, y procedo a las preguntas que les recuerdo pueden estar en el chat de Zoom o algunos comentarios, e incluso, ¿por qué no? Los invito a responder a la pregunta que nos hizo la doctora de qué haríamos ahora para nuestro bienestar. Okay, our first question is from, let's have it from Erasmo Salinas, and he tells us about what strategies institutions and teacher communities might take to undermine the belief that native EFL teachers are better in all aspects.
Okay, right. I like this question because I think this is a topic that I'm sort of passionate about. Maybe it also comes from my own experience, going through the process of learning English as a foreign language, and then also learning some other foreign languages as well. But English was the language that I learned as a foreign language. I learned as a student, and it's also a language that I have experience teaching to students as well. There was this debate in the past. I said in the 80s and in the 90s, it was very common. Things have started moving away from this distinction to some extent, but it is a little sad, in my view, that we still see job adverts, things like that, that distinguish between the two groups. My view is that we shouldn't be thinking of teachers in terms of two separate groups, like we have one group of the native teachers and then the other group of the non-native teachers, right? The two can work very nicely together. And I'm sure you have had this experience in different contexts of working nicely with the other group and sharing experiences and learning from them. And I think that both native and non-native teachers can bring in their own experiences, their own approaches to learning and teaching, and can share them with the students and can help students in a very nice way. I'm not sure the question included the word convince as well, right? Adelia, can you repeat it again, please?
Yes, sure. Says, what strategies institutions and teacher communities might take to undermine the belief that native EFL teachers are better in all aspects?
Right, sorry, to undermine, it was not convinced, I'm sorry about that. To undermine the belief that native teachers are better in all aspects, what can we do? Difficult question to answer, and I think that there is still a long way to go away from this belief, but again, there is hope. There are cases where teachers work very nicely together, and I believe that both groups have lots of interesting experiences to offer to the profession and can advance the profession. It has to be, there has to be change from all fronts, I would say. It is not a matter of individual effort. It is not a matter of the effort of a particular school. It is very encouraging that institutions and associations as large as IATEFL, the British Association for Applied Linguistics, the American Association for Applied Linguistics, TESOL International, are really doing a lot of work to move away from this distinction. In fact, they do not accept this wording in the first place. They do not like the terms, to put it very simply, native and non-native. And they are very adamant in things like job advertisements, job openings, who the plenary speakers are going to be, which teachers are employed where and how, and so on. They are very adamant that these terms, this distinction is not made in this context. So there has to be encouragement from all fronts, I think. But then, yes, if you are in an institution where people are willing to move away from that, then yes, the institution will greatly benefit from it. But if, you know, we try to make sure we move away from it as much as possible, and we see effort and we encourage effort from associations as big as those, the ones that I've mentioned, then I think that the belief will be undermined. But it is important in the first place, I think, for each individual teacher to acknowledge their own strengths and the strengths of other teachers as well, and what they can learn from them. I work with trainee teachers as part of the METSOL course. Most of them have learned English as an additional language. And what many of them actually tell me after the first few sessions of teaching practice is that I am nervous about my speaking because English is not my first language. So it doesn't mean that if the language that we teach is not our first language, doesn't necessarily make one a bad teacher. But I understand the stress, I understand the anxiety, but it is important, you know, to make sure that even in new teachers, like trainee teachers, practicing teachers, change their mindset. They have a different mindset from early on so that they can build on their strengths, which are related to the process of language learning as well.
Thank you, Christina. I wonder if you could stop sharing your screen so we could see you better. Thank you.
Yes. And this way.
Okay, another.
Better.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, another question from David Salas, and he says, what do you think about economic well-being? Would you include it among spiritual, physical, intellectual, or emotional well-being?
Mm-hmm. Nice question. To be honest, I haven't thought about that as a separate dimension. Like, maybe you are right. Maybe we would include it among the 4 existing aspects of well-being that I have gone through. And by economic, in that case, in what sense? What do you have in mind? It's David, I think, who asked this question, right? So what do you have in mind with relation to it?
Okay, let's see if he can.
Yes, David can put it in the chat.
Okay, we invite David, if you could please tell us more. Meanwhile, I'll have other questions. And one of them, and some of them, they are very interested, that they ask about how can we motivate the students. I want to turn into teachers. When we start being teachers, we usually don't think about our own motivation. We concentrate on students. How could we motivate our future teacher students to start thinking about themselves and start working on this well-being?
Mm-hmm. To me, like, the first step would be to make them aware of that, to make them aware of research in general education, even research in psychology first, but then also general education and language education, of the psychological factors that play a role. There is research that has actually shown how important motivation is for language learning, how important low levels of anxiety are for language learning, and that they can facilitate language learning. But if we do not make teachers aware of this line of research, of the findings, and of how other teachers feel, then they will not be able to enter this kind of mindset in a way and start cultivating their well-being. The first step for me then would be to increase teachers' awareness of these aspects and of these factors. And then the second step would be to use ways to make them reflect explicitly on those, because by thinking about them, they will also make them part of their practice. It can be quite stressful, especially for new teachers, I think. It can be quite stressful at the beginning because they need to manage lots of different things at the same time. And all of these things are very new to them. They do not have the experience, they might make mistakes, they are nervous about different things. And it is difficult to, the more things you have to manage at the start, the harder it is to actually teach well or teach effectively, if you like. But if we start making them aware of these factors, I think things will be much more improved in the future.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have too many questions right now.
I see that, yeah.
And also congratulating you on the talk.
Thank you.
And we have one that says, in some classes, it's from Yadira Alma, says, how important is the use of the camera to enhance communication? And how important, says, and my question comes from the fact that many students clearly prefer to turn their cameras. Consequently, eye contact impossible to mention. And say, I forgot, maybe that'd be a stressor for them. Would you please elaborate on this?
I would say that if we are thinking of a pure language class, a class where language is taught, and not, for example, a university lecture and so on, where having cameras off is not such a big problem, but in a language class where communication is actually facilitated through language and through eye contact and interaction, I would say that it is indeed important. But at the same time, I am aware of so many teachers who actually say that their students are hesitant to turn their cameras on in class. And the question is, how can this influence the communication? And it's not just communication that is being influenced in this case, it's the whole process of language learning. All of these are linked with what I mentioned earlier about building a good relationship. And a good relationship is not built when respect is actually shown only from one side. Let's say I am the teacher and I have my camera on, which means class I am on task. I am focusing on the task of teaching. If my students have their cameras off, it is not necessarily a sign of respect. There might be cases where the camera is off because there are other issues involved, for example, connectivity and so on, which we respect as teachers and we understand. But making sure that communication is effective, it facilitates learning, and that a good relationship is built, it means that both groups, both sides should behave in the same way. Something interesting I have noticed in my classes with undergraduate students, it's not a problem with the postgraduate students, is that when we are in the main room on Zoom with the undergraduate students, many of them have their cameras off. Some of them have their cameras on, which is good. When they then work in the breakout rooms, it's actually interesting to observe how they behave when they are in the breakout rooms, because in the breakout rooms, there are groups of 3, groups of 4 students maximum, and they need to work on a task. In order to work on the task with their classmates, they turn their camera on. And that is really interesting for me because I haven't yet figured out why they are doing it. It might be that they feel more comfortable when they're in the breakout room with their classmates and the teacher is not there, so the teacher is not checking on them. I don't know if you have experienced the same thing, but to me, is a little bit of mystery why they are doing that in the breakout rooms and not in the main room. It should be linked with the presence of the teacher, maybe, the fact that the teacher is there. I am not sure. I haven't yet understood why they're doing that, but I would very much want to ask them. Once classes are over, I would really want to ask them why they're doing that. I think, Adelia, you need to, you're muted.
Okay, I take up David Salas and says, I consider that sometimes we focus on doing a superb job at the classroom, and of course we love teaching. However, we are not paid enough or our contracts are not the best. So economic well-being is a real issue that could affect our well-being. Yes,
so I am now much clearer about what you mean. with economic well-being, and it is definitely an issue. It is it is accepted in many contexts that teaching is not a well-paid job. I remember the research one of my doctoral students did in Spain about factors that motivate and demotivate English language teachers. And one of the factors that demotivate teachers is the salary. And there was research that she was citing in other contexts as well, which shows how demotivating a factor this is, and it can really influence well-being. And if I said earlier that we need to look at the four aspects of well-being as working in tandem. They work nicely together, and if they are all in place, then the whole well-being system will be in good shape as well. If one of them is not in place, the entire well-being system might collapse. And indeed, if teachers are affected by contracts, precarious jobs, low paid, not well paid jobs, and so on, this can influence their well-being. And the question is, what can be done about that? And I think teachers are really trying to change this situation. They are trying to change this through their associations, but these are things that are usually beyond the control of individual teachers, or often the managers, the directors of studies. They are not the ones that are making decisions on these things. And this is one instance where teachers might feel helpless and more stressed about their job. I guess if we ask teachers what is their motivation? Why did they decide to become teachers? And if you try to ask this question yourselves, you will most likely tell yourselves that you're doing that because you love teaching, or because you love the language you're teaching, or because you like to help other people, to help students. And this is all very nice, but for many teachers, it becomes stressful when it is in contradiction with the economic well-being or the threats to their economic well-being.
Thank you. The last two questions says, Maite Mayen, tell us, can you please recommend a book on emotional contagion? Yes.
Yes. There's not much out there on a book specifically focusing on emotional contagion, but there are some interesting sources in general education which actually talk about emotional contagion in different chapters. There is a book called Emotions in Education. If I am not mistaken, it was published in 2007. And there is also another one, a little bit more recent, called International Handbook of Emotions in Education, but I need to double check the title, sorry. Yes. They are edited books. Each chapter is written by a different author or different groups of authors, and talks about different emotions, threats to emotion, and so on. And it discusses in different parts of the book, you will find mentions of emotional contagion.
Thank you. And Kalinka Velasco says, how would you relate this approach to well-being of teachers with teacher self-efficacy, if both are related at all?
Yeah, I see this here in the chat. It is related, like self-efficacy, in the sense that teachers are effective in what they do, and they also have some form of self-confidence, right? That they are doing the right thing, that they are as good as they can be, really, and as effective as they can be. I think they are related, and I think that well-being is related with many aspects of the psychology of a teacher. It is related with their emotions and with anxiety, to which I referred a lot during the presentation. It is related with motivation, with identity, but also with a number of self-constructs, self-related constructs, such as self-efficacy and self-confidence, and to some extent, self-esteem as well, like how good a teacher I feel I am, like my own self-esteem and my own self-worth.
Thank you. And while they are asking if you could, share some other bibliography, like basic bibliography that we could use for especially teacher training in order to motivate, as teacher trainers to motivate. And the names, probably you could write them on this chat, or if you can, or probably I can gather something and we could see the means to share some basic bibliography with our participants and attendees.
Yes. What I'm happy to produce such a list, and I think I might already have one actually. So what I'm going to do is I can send it to you, Adelia, and then you can circulate it to attendees.
Yes, you can count on that.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you, Christina. It was a lot of food for thought for us. They are congratulating you. You have given us a lot of thinking, and as managers of teachers, as teachers, and I would include also as learning advisors. We are. We really thank you. So we hope it is not. I hope it is not the last, and I know it will not be the last time we see each other.
I hope so too, and I would really, cherish the opportunity to meet with you in person in the future. I have also included my email address on the first slide, but maybe because I'm not sharing now, I can put it in the chat if anyone wants to get in touch with me with any experiences you want to share or any comments on the talk. You are very welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Cristina, and try turning to Spanish. Agradecemos que nos hayas compartido con estas experiencias, and thank you very much for such inspiring plenary. Con esto, damos por finalizada esta primera plenaria, no sin antes recordarles a quienes nos siguen en esta transmisión en YouTube y Facebook, que se suscriban al canal para que puedan recibir las notificaciones de nuestras siguientes mesas redondas y plenarias que conforman el programa académico de este segundo Congreso Internacional de Lenguas, Lingüística y Traducción. Para quienes nos acompañan en esta sala de Zoom, los invitamos a ingresar a los 3 canales simultáneos que iniciarán en unos minutos. Pueden ingresar a través del micrositio o de su programa interactivo. Les solicitamos atentamente que antes de ingresar a las salas, renombren su perfil de la siguiente manera: asistente-nombre y apellido o apellidos. Agradecemos su atención y su tiempo. Hasta la siguiente transmisión. Hasta luego y muchas gracias.
A todos los asistentes que están aquí en el Zoom webinar, también a todos los que nos están viendo por YouTube, les informo que en este canal haremos una pequeña pausa, así que pueden, los que están acompañándonos aquí por medio de Zoom, se pueden desconectar. Como lo mencionó mi colega Adelia, pues continuamos con el programa y en este canal regresamos a las 11:40 con la mesa redonda ¿Cuáles lenguas aprenden los alumnos universitarios? A cargo de miembros de la Comisión Especial de Lenguas de la UNAM. Muchas gracias.